The evening opened like a bruise across the forgotten town, orange, thinning into rust, and gold, sinking behind a skyline of crooked antennas. Heat rose from the asphalt in slow breaths, and the air carried the penny taste of a rain that would not come. Jake Steele Carter rolled off the throttle and let the motorcycle breathe for him. A low animal murmur that steadied the bones and flattened the noise in his head. He had been riding since the light turned honey on the highway, past shuttered pawn shops and cinder-block bars, with tired neon, riding until the road felt like a confession he did not have to speak. The engine was the only sound he trusted, the only thing that did not lie. Keep the revs down. Keep the eyes up. Let the miles take the questions and grind them small. At the edge of his sight a flicker tugged once and then again. The kind of stutter that meant a streetlight was more shaking than shining. He eased the brake, let a boot scuff pavement, and turned his head because the pattern of the night had been disturbed. Under that nervous cone of light sat two small figures on the curb, pressed shoulder to shoulder so tightly they could have been one shadow split into two. The motorcycle idled beside them like a patient beast. Jake dropped the stand, swung off, and let silence creep back between idle throbs. The street smelled of hot tar and stale fryer grease. Somewhere down the block, a neglected bin leaked a sweet rot. A glass bottle lay on its side near the gutter and caught the flicker, throwing it back in ragged shards. He moved as if the floor might give way beneath him. His boots tapped a slow rhythm on cracked pavement, each step trimmed of threat. Up close, the girls looked 5 or maybe 6. One clutched a teddy worn almost to threadbare. A crooked seam had been hand-stitched down the belly, the way someone sews when hands are shaking. The other carried a thin scratch along her cheek, a pale seam with a dark crust at one edge. Their hair was tangled, dust had grayed the knuckles of small fists. Their eyes were the empty kind that comes only when something too large has pushed through a small life. He crouched, leather creaked at his elbows, and the smell of saddle soap rose with him. He kept his voice soft, the way you extend an open palm to a skittish dog. He asked if they were cold. They flinched together, the teddy ratcheted tighter into the crook of an elbow. He showed them his hands, knuckle loose, palms open. A fly circled the bulb and ticked itself against the glass in tiny taps. The world seemed to hold its breath. Up close, he heard the quick, shallow hauling of their lungs and saw it make the air look older than it was. Dirt ringed one knee, where skin had gone shiny from a scrape. The part of him that had learned survival on hard roads began to catalog without permission. Edges, angles, how long, which direction, what kept them sitting here instead of running. The past came to him not as pictures, but as a way of reading the present. He asked if they were lost. Slow words, simple shape, nothing sharp. Bad voices can do harm faster than any fist. They did not answer. The smaller one turned the loose ear of the teddy between finger and thumb and stared into a shallow puddle, where oil made a rainbow skin. He felt the old rules step forward. Do not get involved. Keep your head down. Trouble that is not yours is a sinkhole, and every step toward it is a step you will pay for. He had lived by worse rules, and he knew how they were built from other people's fear, polished until it shone. He could ride away. He had ridden away before. Nights like this came with exits. He unzipped his jacket anyway. The leather was heavy and lined and patched like a hard history. He let the night touch his arms where sweat had cooled. He draped the jacket across both thin shoulders and made a small tent that swallowed them in warmth. The smell of old road rose clean and honest. If safety had scars, he thought it might smell like this. The shift of weight drew the smaller face upward, slate-colored eyes, after rain met his. The teddy's one hard eye caught the flicker and gave it back as a dull coin. He said he had water. He said there was an apple in the saddlebag if they wanted it. He did not reach yet. He kept himself level with their gaze and did not loom. A moth pinged the bulb and fell, a soft, nothing sound that still felt too loud. A dog barked somewhere, and then stopped as if embarrassed to be heard. The taller girl, if taller meant a little more height and a little more gravity, swallowed as if her throat had forgotten and was relearning. She pressed closer to the smaller, until their shoulders fused beneath the leather, and the jacket answered with a hush. He had seen kids in doorways and on stoops, and in the paint-peeled corridors outside courtrooms. He knew the tautness across a mouth that had heard too much, and he knew the way eyes avoid corners where danger can grow. Seeing these two under a failing light made something reach past his ribs and squeeze the muscle of his heart. He set his palm flat on the pavement, a small lowering of himself, to touch the world they were touching. The road was warm. Pavement always cooled slower than air. He told them he would not hurt them, and felt the truth of how those words are usually said by men who will. He let the sentence sit anyway and carry its own weight. He asked where their mother was, and let the question land like a feather, not like a hook. They looked at each other, and he watched a tiny current pass from one to the other. The smaller lips parted and closed, as if testing whether sound could be trusted. The taller shifted the teddy, so that the patched seam faced him like a badge, or a proof of something he could not yet name. A car turned into the far end of the street, and backed away with a whine. The windows along the block remained blind. This was a town where the night went unreported, because it belonged to everyone, and no one at once. The knowledge slid into him cold and precise, the way a wrench fits a bolt. He tipped his head toward the motorcycle, and said the bike was loud and could be less loud, that he could walk it if they preferred, that they could sit and breathe a minute instead. He told them the choice was theirs. Choice matters. When a day has ripped choice out of a person's hands, the first antidote is to offer it back with both palms. The smaller mouth moved again, a paper-dry sound. The teddy tapped the underside of a chin and stopped. The eyes moved from him to the street, to the oil sheen, and back again. He waited and paid the patience it cost. His knees burned. The curb bit his calves. The engine ticked as heat left metal. A memory tried to climb the fence of his skull. A night when he had walked away and told himself it was not his job. He felt it the way you feel a door you cannot close. He remembered how that silence had followed him and lain beside him on his pillow, heavy and damp. For years, he did not invite that memory. It had a key. He exhaled and steadied his breath against the rhythmic vibration behind him. He asked if they liked apples. He heard himself, and thought he sounded like a man holding out a bright sticker to a child, ridiculous and sincere at once, a scarred hand making kindergarten offerings. The smaller one blinked. The taller answered with a look that meant not yet and maybe later. Far off a siren coughed awake and lay back down. The gold along the roofs gave up to deeper rust, and one first brave star scratched the high sky. A cheap receipt tumbled down the gutter and snagged. He heard the words before he knew they were happening, a thin voice finding a channel and letting a current through. They hurt Mama, 3 small words that could fit on a paper strip and heavy enough to tilt the whole night. He felt them slide between ribs, like the careful edge of a blade that does not stab, but opens a line and tells you there is work to do, and that you must keep blood out of the lung. He did not move. He let the fact stand the way. A medic lets a diagnosis anchor the chaos. He heard it. He logged it. He prepared to act. He said okay, and let the syllables be spaced like stepping stones across rushing water. He said it again. The jacket cocoon shifted as their shoulders trembled. The shiver was not from cold. It was the nervous system firing sparks after a sprint. He saw grit along small calves and the faint ring where a sock had slipped low during a run. The cheek scratch was not bleeding now, which meant time had passed. The dust pattern on their shoes said they had cut across a lot instead of staying on the sidewalk. A smear of something that looked like kitchen grease stained the sleeve of the smaller. Some door somewhere had slammed hard enough to rattle dishes. He could read a night without entering the house where it happened. Reading and choosing were the freedoms left to him. He asked if they knew where she was, and brought the voice down further, because even a question can be a hurt. They folded tighter and gave him his answer. He rolled one shoulder and reached back to the saddlebag without looking away. The zipper hissed. He set a small bottle of water on the curb within reach and laid an apple beside it, red with a soft bruise where it had met a toolbox. He told them the things were theirs, and they could take them now or later or never. The taller looked at the apple and then at him as if preparing for a trick. He kept his hands on his knees. An ant traced the line where curb met street and touched and retreated. He thought of the clubhouse not far away with its dented fridge and jigsawed bar top. He thought of a phone and a number his thumb knew. He thought how the engine beneath him could become a siren if he asked it, and how fast ground could disappear when a promise narrowed the map. Rules are scaffolds, and useful only until the building can stand. He looked at the jacket draped over their shoulders and felt the structure of himself shift in response. Whatever tower he had been bracing was not the same tower now. He could feel it in the new weight of his chest. He asked if he could sit. The taller dipped a small nod, and he slid onto the curb at an arm's length, the pavement warming the seam of his jeans. The idol behind them ticked like a metronome. When he let his head turn just a fraction to scan the block, the town held its pose. Blank windows, quiet doors, a stillness that stains. He kept names out of it. Names could wait. Names were hooks other people could grab. He studied his hands. They were big and blunt and honest in their history. He had used them to build and to break. He flexed the fingers once and let them go quiet. The girls made a sound that was almost breath and almost whimper, and he understood it was not the hands that mattered, but the next movement they would make. He lifted the apple, rubbed the bruise with the heel of his palm, though it would do nothing, and set it down again. The teddy's one glass eye found him and held like a dim bead of persistence. Someone had loved that toy with stubborn, wild devotion. He respected devotion that did not make demands. He did not reach for the phone yet. He let the first medicine be not leaving. Pressure, presence, patience. He felt the old urge to move fast and burn gas and kick doors. He kept the engine inside himself in neutral and waited for the space between their breaths to widen. From the eave above the light a drop let go, and tapped metal with the regularity of a second hand. He matched his lungs to it. In, out. On the third tap, the smaller tilted the teddy toward him, as if asking a question that did not need language. He answered by not flinching. He said okay once more, not because he lacked other words, but because this word was the only honest shape available. He twisted the cap on the water until the seal cracked with a clean sound, and set it back within reach. Open. No push. The streetlight steadied for a heartbeat and then shivered again. A faint wind fussed hair along small temples and slid the smell of old beer down the block. Jake let the night inhabit him the way the jacket inhabited them, heavy but not crushing. The rule that had kept him untouched for so long sloughed away like a scab. Under it the skin was raw and very alive. 3 words hung between them and would not fade. He could feel them setting the pattern of what must come next, arranging the parts on an imaginary cloth, the way a careful mechanic lays tools out in the order he will use them. They hurt Mama, and now he would move. He did not rush them. The words they had spoken still hung in the air, raw and trembling, but something inside him had steadied. The girls had chosen to trust him, if only by inches, and now the night was waiting for what he would do with that trust. Jake pointed once toward the water bottle, his gesture slow, careful, permission instead of command. The taller girl reached first. The smaller watched her hand go, and together they drank in tiny, measured sips. The apple remained untouched, a small red witness to their caution. He rose slowly, giving them time to adjust to his shadow as it stretched across the cracked pavement. The Harley's engine still idled in a low, faithful hum, a heartbeat of steel. He reached down and pressed the switch. The growl faded until the air filled with the hollow quiet that follows thunder. In the silence, the night became larger, but inside its circle of light, the three of them stood joined by something wordless and necessary. He told them they would stand now. He spoke softly, a tone he might have used once long ago with horses on his uncle's farm. He said he would hold the jacket while they kept the teddy, and that they would walk to the bike together. He promised not to start the engine until they said so. The taller girl nodded, her chin barely moving. The smaller clutched the bear's worn ear and rose on unsteady legs. Jake lifted the jacket gently from their shoulders, letting its weight slide into his arm. They walked the first block in silence, the Harley rolling beside them in neutral, heavy but obedient. Their shoes made the faint scuff of rubber against dust. The street stretched ahead, lined with closed shops and indifferent doors. The night was warm and smelled faintly of burnt sugar from a factory that had closed years ago. The girls stayed close enough that their steps matched, one small body echoing the other. When they reached the corner, the taller one turned her head toward him and said softly, "Loud is okay now." Jake nodded once. He thumbed the starter. The machine came alive with a shudder and a growl that seemed to shake loose the silence of the street. Both girls flinched, but neither pulled away. He eased the throttle until the sound softened into a steady hum. He crouched beside them and spoke low so the engine would not drown him out. He told them they would ride only a short way, that the seat behind him was wide, that they could hold on to the bar or to him. He showed them the backrest, tapped it with a gloved knuckle, so they could hear how solid it was. He explained what to do with small words. 2 pats on my back means slow, he said. 3 means stop. Try it. They did, small palms drumming his jacket like birds, learning a call. He smiled without showing his teeth and helped them climb onto the seat. The smaller one sat in front, the taller behind her, both wrapped again in his leather. The teddy was wedged between them, its patched belly rising and falling with the rhythm of their breaths. He kicked the stand and rolled forward. The bike glided out of the pool of broken light and into the deeper dark of the road. He kept the speed soft, so the wind pressed but did not sting. The city's forgotten streets slid past them, graffiti ghosts on walls, windows blind with old dust. A single lighted diner sign flickering over nothing. The taller girl's hands tightened when they hit the first turn, then relaxed as she learned the bike's balance. 2 miles later, they reached the clubhouse. It sat low and square, the front wall painted with an emblem that looked meaner than the men inside had ever been. Jake slowed until the gravel under the tires crunched like sugar. He parked under the overhang and let the engine fall quiet again. He could feel the girl's small hands unclench behind him. Inside, the light was low and gold. A jukebox glowed in the corner, unplugged but still full of dust and memory. The men at the tables turned their heads as Jake came in, helmet in one hand, 2 children in the other. For a heartbeat, the room froze, caught between disbelief and silence. Then a chair creaked. No one spoke. Jake said only one word. Food. He crossed to the kitchen corner and pulled the refrigerator open. Cold air rolled out, sharp with the smell of old beer and leftover takeout. He grabbed milk cartons, twisted their caps, and poured them into 2 chipped mugs. The girls sat on the nearest sofa, legs tucked under the jacket like they were hiding from the world. He set the mugs on the low table between them, then found bread and peanut butter, and made 2 rough triangles of a meal. When they began to eat, he turned away, giving them privacy, because sometimes kindness means pretending not to watch. He stepped outside, phone in hand. The night air felt cleaner here, less haunted. The number he needed was already burned into his muscles. Laura answered on the second ring, her voice clear, steady, professional. He gave her only what mattered. 2 girls, alone under a streetlight, their mother missing. Signs of violence. She listened without interrupting, the kind of silence that meant attention, not indifference. She told him to stay put, and promised she would start checking shelters and police channels. She would text him an address. Keep them warm, she said. Do not make promises you cannot keep. He said he understood. When he stepped back inside, the girls had finished eating. The taller one wiped a trace of peanut butter from the smaller one's lip with the cuff of her sleeve. The teddy sat between them, a sentry with one eye. Jake crouched beside the couch and told them they could rest a while. He took off his gloves, laid them on the table, and dialed down his voice until it was almost a whisper. You are safe here. My friends will stay on that side of the room. Nobody crosses unless you say so. The smallest one leaned her cheek against the teddy. The taller nodded, serious beyond her years. He could see the fatigue creeping over them like dusk. He watched their eyelids droop, then rise again, as if they feared what dreams might do to them. His phone vibrated once, a text from Laura, address, a short description. A woman named Sarah Miller, registered in a small rental on the south side. No answer to her phone. Possible domestic call earlier in the evening. He read the words twice, the facts settling like stones. He looked at the 2 girls and knew he could not stay still. He said he would borrow his jacket for a moment. The taller hesitated, then nodded. He slid the leather free. It had absorbed their warmth, and for an instant he felt it against his skin like borrowed courage. He folded it across his arm and stood. He told the men in the room that the kids were under their watch, that they were to guard that line he had drawn. No noisy, no questions. One of them, an old friend named Rook, nodded and sat down near the door, arms crossed, eyes soft but alert. Jake placed the apple on the table beside the teddy. He told the girls to save it for later, that apples travel well. The smaller girl smiled, a quick blink of light before the shadow returned. Then he was outside again. The night smelled faintly of gasoline and rain that refused to fall. He pulled on the jacket and let the weight settle around him like armor. The Harley's ignition clicked, and the engine woke with a deep growl. He glanced once at the door. Through the small window, he saw the edge of a curtain move, maybe a hand waving, or a shadow shifting. He lifted 2 fingers in reply. He rode without haste, letting the tires find the quiet paths through town. The streets narrowed until they became alleys, walls close enough to brush his shoulders if he leaned wrong. He passed shuttered shops, a half-lit laundromat, and a cat that slipped into the dark. The address Laura had sent was 3 turns away. He knew the area, the kind of block where police lights were both warning and decoration. He cut the engine before the corner and coasted the last few yards in silence. The alley he wanted lay behind a row of low buildings. Trash bins stood like tired guards. The air smelled of damp cardboard and metal rust. He let the bike rest against the wall and listened. Nothing but the drip of a leaky pipe and the faint echo of a television somewhere above. A door ahead hung crooked, Its frame splintered near the lock. Glass glittered along the ground, catching the faint wash of a flickering bulb. He approached, steps measured, hands open. He did not call out the woman's name. He spoke instead to the space between them, quiet enough that it would not wake whatever ghosts lived here. "We are safe," he said. "Your girls are with friends. They are warm and fed. A pause. My name is Jake. I am here because someone asked me to be." For a moment there was nothing, only the pulse in his ears. Then he heard it, a faint breath, so small it might have been wind. It came from the narrow gap between a dumpster and the wall. He stepped closer, slow as tide. A shape shifted, the outline of a woman drawn thin by fear. Her face caught the trembling light, one lip split, eyes wide and bright with exhaustion. He did not move nearer. He crouched just enough to make himself smaller. He said, "We do not have to go yet. We can wait for you to breathe." The air between them felt fragile, stretched, thin but unbroken. He kept his hands at his sides, palms out, as if to show he carried no weapons except intent. The woman's shoulders shuddered once, twice, and then she spoke. The sound barely human, a rasp more than a word. "Please." The single syllable fell apart halfway, but it was enough. He nodded. That was all the permission he needed. He would not rush her, not yet. He would move when she could stand, not before. Behind him the alley stayed silent. The streetlight blinked once and steadied, and the motorcycle waited like a living thing that already knew the next mile it would have to carry. He held the busted doorway like a man steadying a sagging beam, and let the night breathe through him so she could borrow some of it. The alley smelled of wet paper and rusted metal, a sour taste that clung to the tongue. From the seam of shadow beside the dumpster, a face tilted into the broken light. Blood had dried in a thin seam along her lower lip. Her shoulders shivered once, then again, the way a small bird shivers before it dares the open air. He kept his palms open at his sides. "We can wait," he said. Voice softened until it would not startle the dark. "Your girls are warm. They are with friends." He did not add anything bright to the word safe. Bright things can be a lie. He let the word stand on its own leg. Her breath rasped in, scraped out. "Please," she said, a syllable worn thin by fear. He nodded. "I will come slow. If you want me to stop, say stop." She did not say it. He stepped closer, a half step at a time, until the chemical reek of the alley gave way to the smaller truth of a human body running on fumes. He saw more, bruising beginning to rise along the cheekbone like storm water, faint oval marks at the throat where fingers had meant to take and had been interrupted. One arm braced to guard the ribs. He did not touch until she dipped her chin once, a permission that cost her. Then he slid his leather from his shoulders and set it around her like a roof. The jacket sighed. Inside that sigh, the world narrowed to workable size. "Can you stand?" he asked. She tried and folded. He tucked an arm under hers, felt the flinch where bone argued, and offered his weight the way you offer a railing to a tired climber. "We will go easy." He set his stance so every step she took arrived already half supported. Before they moved, he looked back at the splintered frame. Tooth marks chewed from the wood around the lock, a smear of dark at the jamb, glass seeded across the ground, pieces finest near the hinge and larger toward the alley mouth. A timeline in fragments. With his free hand he pulled his phone, framed wide, then tight, the way someone once taught him, when pictures must become receipts, and receipts must become protection. He made new art. He made proof. He crouched, still bearing her weight, and took the shoe shot that later would speak when a mouth could not. Tread pattern, thus the glass. A fresh crescent scraped from the toe. He lowered the angle so the splinters cast honest shadows. He let the shutter clicks be the only language the alley heard. He thumbed a short message to the woman who knew what to do with facts. Location pinned. Mother alive. Images attached. Her answer came almost at once. A tone against his palm. Bring her to emergency now. Intake alerted. Officers notified. Patrol requested to secure scene. Do not engage if the man returns. He slid the phone away. Understood, already lived in the way he shifted her weight toward the light. Can you ride? He asked. Not far, enough to get you seen. Her eyes found his. The answer was not brave so much as practical. Yes, she said, voice scraped down to thread. He guided her from the wedge of shadow into the alley's thin glow. The motorcycle waited with patient gravity. Helmet, he said, lifting his to her head, cinching the strap with careful fingers, and leaving space for breath. Dust glimmered on her cheek, stubborn and ordinary. He wanted to wash it away. He wrote that want into his chest and told it to hold until the right room. He did not let the machine loom. He braced it low, kept its weight gentle, made it a piece of sturdy furniture instead of a beast. When she lifted her leg over, pain grabbed at her breath. He anchored her with a palm and let gravity decide the rest kindly. He tucked the jacket around her ribs and hip, making warmth where the night wanted to take it. Hands here, he said, setting her palms to the backrest's certainty. When we stop, press your knees in. If you need slow, tap my shoulder twice. If you need stop, tap 3 times. He preferred tapping to words. Words carry, and the alley still listened. He swung into the seat and woke the engine. Not a roar, a low, continuous statement that they would move. The alley light flickered, steadied, flickered again, as if blessing their exit in a broken code. He rolled them out, feet sure, clutch patient. The crooked doorway became a line in the mirror, and then it was gone. The town reassembled around them into route and rule. He took streets that remembered how to be smooth. He chose corners with wide sightline. When the distant breath of a patrol car drifted across another block, he logged it and did not alter course. His work was forward. He kept the speed tender so the wind would not stiffen her shoulders. Once he felt the taps, testing their new language. Twice. Not slow, just a proof that she could ask. He thought of the clubhouse, his jacket holding heat around 2 small backs, an apple shining on a table beside a tired teddy. The thought stroked his chest and then was filed. Keep upright. Keep the corners clean. We are going to emergency, he said, speaking just loud enough to clear the wind. They will give you a band with a time that tells the truth. They will make notes that do not forget. You will sit and breathe, and the room will hold you while the rest catches up. His words were not sugar. They were a map. Her answer was a long exhale. She did not say thank you. She did not need to. She stayed. The hospital district rose in sodium haze and bright, hard fluorescent. Some rooms make a man feel like his history arrives before he does and signs him in under names he no longer answers to. He let that feeling burn away. This was not his center. He was the hinge carrying a door to its frame. At the curb, he cut the engine. The automatic doors inhaled them and exhaled conditioned air that smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. The triage desk glowed under a truth-telling light. He held out a hand, flat, not touching, and let her choose it. She did. Her grip was weak but deliberate. Choice matters. He kept his voice clean. Adult female, assault, breathing, rib pain, lip laceration, possible marks at the neck, children safe with responsible adults. Licensed worker has notified police. He did not name anyone. He did not need to. The nurse nodded, and a machine of steps came awake. Here, the nurse said, sliding a clipboard aside to make room for a person. A small printer chattered. A clear band took a sticker like a flag accepts its ink. Name, number, time. He watched the numbers fix themselves into the plastic. He was not a man who loved clocks. But he loved this, a moment nailed into place, so it could not be scraped off later. The nurse asked her questions in the even rhythm that keeps panic from stealing answers. Where does it hurt? Can you breathe? Any spinning? Any blackout? He let the mouth that owned the pain answer. He guarded the space by not filling it. Another nurse arrived with a wheelchair and a too-thin blanket. The blanket could not warm, but the act could. He stepped back a half pace, to the threshold, where presence does not become clutter. The chair rolled. The first nurse looked up and measured him with a practiced glance. "Family?" she asked, without edge. "No," he said. "I found her and brought her in. Children are safe at a known address." He offered his phone at his chest height. Door, frame, glass, shoe. He did not push it across. The nurse reached, scrolled once, and her mouth tightened. "Keep those," she said. "Officers will want copies. Intake will log injuries." "Thank you." He nodded and walked a slow circuit of the waiting room. The chairs had been designed to discourage rest. He sat anyway because a seated body tells the nervous system that the sprint has a pause. He sent a message that said, "Only in triage now." The reply came quick. "Officers on the way, shelter intake ready. I will meet the girls and stay through transfer." A knot inside him loosened, not all the way, but enough to make breath feel less like labor. He stood and looked through the glass doors into the parking lot. Harsh light laid the truth on every dent and scratch. He studied the edges where shadows gather. When men like the one who started this are hunting for courage to do a second harm, he saw nothing that moved wrong. The breeze tugged the scent of rain across the asphalt and failed once more to deliver it. Back at the desk, he asked whether he could let the girls know their mother had been found. The nurse nodded, handed him a number for later, and returned to her work. He wrote the message clean as a report. Mother admitted. Time recorded on band. He spelled the time in words because he knew how eyes read when adrenaline is loud. He pictured two small faces under his leather and felt a tide go out inside him without taking anything important with it. He let himself sit again and kept a small inventory the way some men keep prayer beads. Girls warm. Teddy posted at attention. Apples saved. Broken frame documented. Band printed. Chain begun. In the hall, a door opened and a name was called that now belonged to someone whose shoulders no longer shivered. He did not stand. This turn was not his. He looked down at his hands, at the pale, ropey lines the years had left, and thought about how those hands had just behaved and how they would need to behave next. He rose and let the doors breathe him back into the night. The leather smelled like work done well. He tightened one glove and left the other loose to keep his fingers honest. The motorcycle answered with the familiar thrum that used to mean escape and now meant follow through. He rolled away from the hospital glow. The road ahead looked smaller, not because danger had fled, but because the path between points had been named and marked. As he leaned into the first turn, he felt the phone in his pocket, a small, hard square holding images and messages that daylight could not argue with. He felt the empty space where his jacket used to keep his heat, and was glad it was doing its real job elsewhere. Somewhere behind him, automatic doors sighed open for someone else. Somewhere ahead of him, a building with a scarred door held two children who had learned a tapping language in a single night. He aimed the headlamp down the old road and let the engine tell the miles to behave. The rescue had ended. The record had begun. He rode the miles back with the calm of a man carrying something fragile that must not spill. The road was quiet, washed in the gray pre-dawn light, the kind that flattens color and makes a town look honest. The hospital lights faded behind him until they were only a memory in his mirrors. The Harley's engine settled into a low heartbeat that kept him steady and the weight in his chest felt measured, not heavy. The clubhouse came into view, its sign a tired ghost of red against the dark. He cut the engine and let silence move in, then pushed the door open. The room smelled of old coffee and oil, and the faint sweetness of bread. The twins were still where he had left them, curled under his leather, the teddy propped like a guard between them. Rook sat near the door, a sentry in denim and scars. When Jake stepped in, Rook lifted a brow. Jake nodded once. Safe, the nod said. Done for now. He crouched beside the girls. Your mother is at the hospital, he told them. She is being helped. His voice was steady but soft. Every word carried like a careful package. The taller girl's chin trembled. The smaller pressed her face into the teddy's matted fur. She has a wristband with her name. And the time, Jake said. That means no one can pretend this didn't happen. The taller girl nodded, not sure what it meant, but knowing it mattered. He pushed the apple toward them. Save it for later. Apples keep. He looked up at Rook. Keep the door clear, he said. No noisy. No crowd. The men inside the room gave the kind of silence that means agreement. Jake slid his arms into the jacket again. It still held a trace of their warmth. He guided the girls outside, small hands gripping the back of his belt. 2 taps for slow, 3 for stop. He reminded them. They practiced the rhythm, tiny but sure. He smiled once. Quick, then swung a leg over the bike. The ride to the hospital was short, the streets empty, except for the hum of streetlights. He kept the speed easy so the wind did not bite. The smaller girl leaned into her sister. The teddy's one eye caught the passing lights like a tiny star. When the hospital came into sight, a square of white and chrome rising from the dark, he felt their small bodies stiffen. Almost there, he said. They did not answer, but their grip tightened, and that was answer enough. He parked under the canopy, where the automatic doors breathed open and closed. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of bleach and paper. The nurse at the desk looked up. 2 children to see their mother. He said, Sarah Miller, admitted tonight. The nurse checked a screen, nodded, and pointed to a waiting area down the hall. Jake led the girls to the chairs and crouched so they would see his eyes. Not his size. Wait here, he said. I'll make sure they know you're here. He turned back to the desk and placed his phone on the counter. The nurse glanced up again. He opened the gallery with his thumb, showing the images in sequence. Broken door, glass spread, shoe print, time stamp. He spoke the time out loud, making each digit its own word. The nurse wrote it on a form and clipped it to a file. She nodded once. Thank you. We'll add this to the report. It becomes part of the record. From somewhere down the hall came the slow echo of boots on tile. 2 officers stepped through the sliding doors, with Laura between them. Her face looked sharp with focus, her clipboard already open. She moved fast but not rushed. Her eyes found Jake first, then she looked at the girls. You did good work, she said to them, clear and direct. Your mom is resting. You can see her soon. She turned to the officers. The images are verified. Door forced entry. Timeline holds. The shorter officer tilted his head toward Jake. We have a suspect on radar, he said. We'll confirm identity at the address. Jake nodded once. Slow. Laura tapped her phone, the soft blue light glinting off her nails. Everything you sent is uploaded, she said. The timestamp from the wristband aligns, chains intact. The next sound came from the sliding doors. A voice raised too loud for the hour. The man appeared first as a shadow, and then as a shape. Broad shoulders, quick movements, a face carved by anger more than thought. His hands twitched near his pockets. His eyes scanned for a target. The room stiffened. He saw the girls and stepped forward before the officers could speak. That's my family, he barked. You can't keep me from them. The officers moved like water, closing around a breach. Sir, one said evenly. "This area is restricted." The man kept coming. He jabbed a finger toward Jake. "You. This is your fault. You turned her against me." The finger shook, and behind it, the room gathered its breath. Laura stepped forward, a sheet of paper in her hand. "The intake record from tonight," she said. "The time, the injuries, the statement, everything logged." The man barely glanced before shoving the air with his hand. "Lies," he said. "She lies." But his voice cracked on the last word. One officer raised a hand. "Firm, but quiet. Sir, step back now." The man ignored him, moved one step too far, and the world made its small correction. The officer turned his body sideways, guiding rather than striking. The man's arm folded into a hole, his balance gone in a heartbeat. The cuffs clicked once, a soft metallic punctuation. The sound was final, like a stamp pressed into paper. The waiting room exhaled as one body. The man tried to speak again, but the words tangled behind the metal at his wrists. "You are being detained on suspicion of assault," the officer said, rights measured and calm. The rest of the noise belonged to routine. The door opened. The cuffs and the anger went out together. Laura watched them leave, then looked down at the document still in her hand. She folded it once and slipped it into the file she carried. Procedure, not victory. She turned back to the girls and crouched again. "Your mother is awake," she said. "The nurse will bring you to her soon. Before that, can you tell me your names for the record?" The taller answered first. The smaller echoed, their voices shaky but clear. Laura smiled with her eyes, wrote the names down exactly, and handed each a small paper tag marked visitor. "Wear this," she said. "It tells everyone you belong here." Jake sat back and let the quiet return. The nurse at the desk typed steadily. A janitor rolled a mop bucket down the hall, the wheels whispering. He felt the tension drain from his shoulders, the kind that builds slow and leaves slower. The taller girl looked at him once. He nodded. No words. The smaller hugged the teddy until the fabric creaked. When the nurse appeared again, she beckoned. The girls rose, hands linked. The bear came too, its patchwork belly pressed between them. Laura followed, clipboard under one arm, her step half guard, half guide. Jake watched until the hallway swallowed them. He stayed where he was, near the window, watching the reflections of the waiting room lights shimmer on the glass. The officers returned a few minutes later, paperwork in hand. One gave Laura a nod, a gesture that meant everything lined up. "We'll file tonight," he said. The images and timestamps were clear. She answered with a small tilt of her chin. "Chains complete. The man will be booked and held overnight. The evidence holds tight." Jake heard it without turning. "Good," he said softly. No pride in the word, just closure. He stepped outside a few minutes later, letting the hospital doors sigh closed behind him. The air was cool, damp with the promise of rain that still refused to fall. The parking lot stretched under white light, every dent on every car visible. He leaned on the bike and looked up at the sky. Somewhere above the clouds, the sun was waiting its turn. Behind him, the building hummed, the sound of machines, of healing, of systems doing what they were built to do. Inside, a woman was safe, her children wrapped around her, the teddy finally resting. The noise of cuffs and sirens had already become part of the background. What remained was the steady pulse of order, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Jake slipped on his gloves. The leather smelled faintly of antiseptic now, the scent that clings to everything after hospitals. He pulled the helmet strap tight, turned the key, and let the engine wake. Its growl sounded different tonight, less like escape, more like arrival. He looked once toward the hospital windows. Somewhere behind the glass, 3 small faces were learning how safety sounds. He eased the bike into gear. The headlamp cut a path through the empty street, and the town unfolded ahead. Stripped clean by dawn, he rode slow. There was paperwork to finish, a shelter to reach, signatures to make. But for the first time in years, the road didn't feel like running. It felt like witness. The hospital had grown quieter by the time Jake returned inside. The night was breaking open into morning, the halls shifting from emergency to order. The hum of the machines had softened, the lights were less harsh, and every voice spoke in the tone of paperwork. Slow, deliberate, careful. Laura waited near the end of the corridor, a folder tucked against her chest. The fatigue on her face looked earned, not wasted. Shelter is ready, she said. Intake is set, we just need the chain clean. Her voice was even, but something in it carried the calm of a person who had spent years learning how to build structure out of chaos. Jake nodded. Tell me where to stand. They walked the hall together. Behind one closed door, the twins were curled near their mother. Behind another, a nurse recorded vitals that would later become evidence. Every door they passed seemed to hum with the relief of survival. When they reached the elevator, Laura pressed the button with the back of her knuckle. The doors opened on a sigh. The ground floor smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and paper. It was the scent of systems, of signatures, and stored memory. The shelter office was small but bright. A woman in a blue cardigan stood waiting beside a table, her name badge reading Dana. Shelter intake. She smiled the kind of smile that knew when to keep its edges soft. We'll take it one step at a time, she said. The careful part first. On the table lay a clear plastic evidence bag, a clipboard, and a roll of printed labels. Everything was waiting to be named. Dana slipped on gloves, as though preparing for surgery. The act made the air steadier. Property inventory, she said gently. We log, we seal, we sign. Sarah sat beside the table, pale but upright. The girls clung to her sides, the teddy wedged between them like a guard. Slowly, Sarah began to empty her pockets. Keys, a cracked phone, a ring on a thin chain, a folded receipt stained with grease. Dana spoke each item aloud as she lifted it, like a ritual of recognition. Keys, cell phone, chain with ring, one paper receipt. Each went into the bag. Jake stood near the door, watching, saying nothing. The process carried its own rhythm, the soft crackle of plastic, the slide of pen on form, the low murmur of naming. When the last item was inside, Dana flattened the strip of adhesive across the top. The sound of the seal closing was small but final. Initial here, she said to Sarah, pointing to a narrow space above the line marked recipient. Sarah's hand trembled but found its way. Dana added her initials beside hers, the motion smooth and practiced. Laura leaned in next, writing her initials where witness of transfer waited. Then she looked at Jake. We need a second witness for the chain of custody on the photographs and statement, she said. You were there when they were taken. Jake looked at the line, empty, expectant. He took the pen and wrote his name carefully. Jake S. Carter. No aliases, no shortcuts, no exits. The words filled the line like a door closing behind him. Laura nodded once. That's the lock, she said softly. Dana printed a small label and placed it on the bag, pressing the edges down with her gloved fingers. Then she wrote the time across the bottom in neat letters. 10:27 a.m. She said the words aloud, anchoring them in sound. The printer beside her whirred again, giving birth to another label for the clothing Sarah had worn. Shirt, torn at shoulder, sealed. Pants, scuffed at knee, sealed. The order in her voice was almost kind. The twins watched, quiet and intent. The smaller traced the edge of the table with her finger. The older held the teddy upright, as if to make sure it saw everything. Jake caught their eyes for a moment and nodded. They nodded back. Laura spread the next page on the table. Shelter rules, she said, tapping the headings. Emergency contact. Quiet hours. Check-in log. She wrote her number first, then slid the paper toward Jake. Do you want to be listed for transport? For future contact? He hesitated only long enough to feel the weight of the question. Yes, he said, and signed again. The ink settled into the paper. Drying clean, a keyade beat past. The air in the room seemed to change, lighter now, as though the worst had already been named and boxed. The twins began to draw on the back of a blank form. A small square house. A sun. Two stick figures holding something that looked like a bear. The teddy lay flat between them. Now, both pillow and witness, an officer appeared in the doorway, his uniform still smelling faintly of rain. Booking confirmed, he said. Detainment authorized through morning. He nodded once at Laura, once at the sealed bags. The work here looked solid. His expression said, no holes. Dana gathered the forms into a folder with gentle precision, then handed Sarah a small envelope. Inside is a copy of your wristband number, she said. Keep it with you. It tells the truth if anyone ever forgets to. Sarah held the envelope as if it were something alive. When everything was done, Dana took off her gloves and spoke softly to the family. There's a room ready upstairs, she said. 2 beds, a bathroom with a lock, and a nightlight that doesn't flicker. You can sleep together if that helps. Breakfast is after 8. If you need anything before that, press the bell once. Someone will come. Sarah rose. Slow but steady. The twins stood too, folding their drawing carefully and tucking it into the teddy's soft back. They followed Dana toward the door. Laura went with them, her clipboard now closed. Jake stayed. The table held the clear sealed bags, the forms with their lines of ink, the weight of something finished. He placed a hand flat on the table's surface. It was smooth, cool, real. The air smelled of lemon, paper, and quiet. The noise of the printer had stopped. He thought of how fast his life used to move. Every problem, a fire to smother. Every night, a sprint. Now, standing in this small room of forms and signatures, he felt the truth of something steadier. The old urge to run rose in him, and was met by a simple fact. The moment no longer needed fast. It needed stillness. He stepped outside, down the hall where sunlight was gathering through narrow windows. The building behind him had the hush of a place that knew how to hold what it had been given. The air outside carried the metallic taste of a new day. Laura caught up to him at the entrance. You signed clean, she said. Everything whole. The chain is closed. Good, he said. That's how it should end. He stood on the steps and looked at the parking lot. The Harley waited, dew shining along the seat like small pieces of truth. He didn't start it right away. He just rested a hand on the tank and let the cool metal press back. Somewhere above, a gull called once, then disappeared toward the water. Behind him, the shelter doors shut with a quiet click, the sound of a lock finding its home. He smiled, the first true one in hours, small and private. The lock had been made, the chain held. The rest would come in order. Morning opened without fanfare. A quiet widening of light that slid along brick and glass, and the brushed steel of the shelter's handrails. Jake stood on the steps a moment longer than habit would have allowed in an older life, and let the day take his measure. The building behind him breathed with the calm of completed work. Phones rang low, and even doors sighed instead of slammed. Paper moved from one hand to another with the soft authority of things that had already been decided. He was not in a hurry to go, and not inclined to linger. He took the middle ground the day offered, a posture of readiness that did not show its teeth. The Harley sat in a square of shade like a faithful animal at rest. Dew had already pulled back into the leather in small dark commas. He set a palm to the tank and felt the cool give way to the warmth of his skin. The neighborhood declared itself awake in a series of unremarkable sounds that felt like grace. Abus Sayed. A delivery truck chirped in reverse and then hushed. Someone tested a radio and reconsidered the song. Ordinary noises, honest and clean. Laura stepped through the door with the unassuming confidence of someone who keeps thresholds. Clipboard tucked, hair drawn back, soap and coffee ghosting her sleeves. Chain is closed, she said. Chart is locked. Shelter has them. I will be back at midday to carry the next part. She tilted her head a fraction toward the street, a small permission to stand down without disappearing. He answered with a nod that acknowledged both the work and the rest it had earned. I will stay nearby. He rolled the Harley from its shadow and let the engine wake in a low hum that asked permission instead of taking the road by force. He matched his speed to the morning, not fast, not slow, the precise pace of a man escorting quiet. The clubhouse lay only a handful of turns away. He did not need to think about the route. Muscle remembered the angles. Rook had propped the clubhouse door with a crate, and a mood that looked like relief had finally found him. Coffee, he said, and held out a chipped mug, like a peace offering to whatever remained unsettled in the world. Jake took the cup and stood just inside the frame, watching the room reset itself from night to day. The table where the girls had sat carried the small evidence of care. Someone had cut the apple into even wedges and lined the seeds in a neat row, punctuation marks that said this story had reached a pause. The air smelled of coffee, oil, and the faint clean of a wiped bar. He did not tell the men what had happened. He let their silence respect the work in a language that did not require nouns. They good? Rook asked, as if 3 letters could hold an entire ledger. They are held, Jake said. That is enough for now. The coffee bit his tongue, the way a true thing sometimes stings before it steadies you. He left the cup on the rail, reclaimed the door, and stepped out into the brightening day. He let the engine do the talking in a murmur and drifted toward the river, because water makes sense of hours that have been asked to carry too much. The road that ran along the warehouses kept its head down and minded its duties. Weeds combed chain link. A gull cut an arc above the brown surface, changed its mind, and tried again. Under the low bridge he found a strap of shade that held like a promise. He killed the motor and listened to the last ticks of heat, stepped down through the cylinders. A small mechanical lullaby. He leaned against the rail with both palms and felt the metal's cool honesty climb into his hands. The old rule that had driven him for years stirred once and then lay still. Motion had been his cure and his punishment. It had saved him from thoughts, but not from himself. Presence, he had learned, was another kind of labor. He let the river carry that lesson past, and then return it, softened by distance, rounded and truer. Across the street, a small courtyard opened from the shelter's side. He knew it by the square of healthy grass and the brick that wore its red without apology. He saw them before he had time to decide whether to expect them. 2 small silhouettes, a third taller, and another figure at the edge, like a guard in a painting. Dana walked with her shoulder, angling toward the world in a way that welcomed the friendly wind and took the rest herself. Sarah moved carefully but upright, one hand near her ribs out of habit more than pain. The twins had visitor badges pinned to their shirts. Official as any 2 people could be, he did not stride to meet them. He waited and let them make the distance as their bodies allowed. When the taller girl reached him, she set a small hand on the seam where his jacket met the pocket, a grip that declared comfort without demanding it. The smaller looked up and made her decision with her chin before her mouth spoke. She held out the teddy. Sleep had pressed a cheek into the fur and left a map there. A narrow strip of white paper was wrapped around the belly like a sash. the kind hospitals use to name vials and tubes. In careful marker, someone had written a single true word. The smaller spoke while still holding on. Mama says heroes get hugs, but you do not like crowds. So you can carry this instead. She turned the bear so the stitched belly faced outward like a medal. The paper was not decoration. It was record. It was proof on soft cloth. He crouched until their eyes were level, and let the thanks be simple enough to land. "Thank you," he said, each syllable set precisely. He slid a finger under the sash and felt the ridge of dried ink. He did not promise forever. He promised care. He tied the bear to the sissy bar with a narrow leather strip he had once used to hold a map roll. The knot square and modest. The bear came to rest just inside the headlamp's wash, a quiet badge worn without drama. Sarah stood a step back, steady in a way that made space for her face to move again. "Thank you." Tried to climb through the bruised corridor of her throat, and sensibly stayed behind her eyes. She did not need to spend the word. She touched the envelope in her sweatshirt pocket, the one that held her time and her truth, and lifted it a fraction, a gesture that said, "This is the weight I carry now, not the other weight that used to hold me under." Dana nodded once, the professional acknowledgement of someone who had seen 1,000 mornings survive their nights. "The girls have craft hour," she said. "We are going to tape their drawing on the wall where people can see it. House, door, bear." Saying the words out loud made them more real, and she let herself smile. "Laura will bring the next forms later, but after that I will stop talking about paper because sleep is evidence too." He rose, and the girls took their cue and stepped back with him. Small feet, learning the discipline of release. He checked the knot at the sissy bar the way a pilot checks a hinge. The bear looked forward with its one clear eye and wore the paper ribbon like a quiet oath. Above them, a truck rolled across the bridge and sprinkled a short rain of gravel that clinked against the rail and went still. "We will be around," he said, plain as weather. "If you need a ride to a place that speaks plainly, I will make the road behave." The older girl nodded like someone receiving a schedule. The younger pressed her palm to the tank where his hand had been, leaving a faint fog print that warmed away at its own pace. He did not hurry the disappearance. Some traces are better for being temporary. They turned toward the courtyard. 3 bodies and 1 bear-shaped absence that had become a presence on the back of a motorcycle. Dana angled herself to take whatever gust might come. Jake watched them pass through the gate. In a pane of office glass, he caught the blur of a drawing, walking toward tape and wall. The house had a door drawn with confident lines. The door did not pretend to be unlocked. It promised to open for the right hand. He sat the Harley and waited without lighting it, the way a person waits at the end of a prayer to see if silence will answer. Then he turned the key and let the engine come up to a patient hum. He took a slow loop around the block to test the sky, and felt its cooperation in the way shade and sun traded places without argument. The bear's head nodded once in rhythm with the street. Not jaunty, not tragic, assigned. At a red light he looked back across the intersection. A woman in a uniform carted a stack of fresh linens through a side door. Paper had become cloth. Cloth would become sleep. Sleep would become the strength to carry paper again. He could live with that equation. He eased through the green and let the tires write a small circle of witness on the morning. The river road met him again and gave him its mild solitude. He throttled down under the bridge until the engine's song thinned and stopped. The quiet that followed had the particular ring of a true thing after it has been said aloud. He thought about the first flicker at the streetlight, the hint of hesitation that had in fact been an invitation. He thought about seals pressed flat and labels read into the room, about cuffs that had clicked like stamps, about a plastic band that remembered the hour for anyone with a mind to forget. He thought about his name on a line, a fair exchange. He decided, for all the years he had treated names like shutters, he could open and close according to weather. He did not force conclusions, he let them arrive with the tide's logic and recede with it too. A barge moved past at the pace of law. Two teenagers on scooters tried a wide arc and came out of it giggling, their joy still untrained enough to make room for whatever might come next. Above it all, the sun went on with its old task, adding brightness to edges without asking for credit. He swung onto the seat again. His right hand found the throttle with the confidence of habit. Married to choice, the bear rode behind, a small republic of stitched cloth and ribboned proof. He turned toward the long road out, not as a man fleeing, and not as a man arriving, but as a courier assigned to motion after delivery. The message had found its destination. Now the work was to keep going without pretending that going itself was the point. At an intersection, a crossing guard lifted a palm and held a family until a school bus declared its right of way. Jake waited, engine warm, boot planted, the bear's ribbon, a pale line in the corner of his vision. The light changed, the road opened. He rolled forward into a day that did not yet need him and would, sooner or later, surely call. Ink dries, he thought, but it keeps speaking. The ribbon fluttered once in the headlamp's wash and lay quiet against the stitched belly, its letters dark and calm. He rode on, not faster than breath, and not slower than thought, and let the old machine carry the small proof with the steady patience of a life that had finally chosen its work. The day did not begin clean. It unfolded like a document already signed, full of lines that could not be erased. Jake woke to thin light cutting through the blinds and the smell of metal from the coffee pot he never bothered to replace. The jacket hung where he had left it, bent at the shoulders, still heavy from the work it had done. On the table lay a folded sheet with his name printed neat and black, Laura's handwriting on the top, a schedule below, intake follow-up at 9, filing at 11, notarization by noon. He ran a thumb over the words as if they were raised. Then he drank half the coffee before it cooled and stepped into the morning with the jacket on and his name sitting right between his shoulder blades like a weight he could carry. The Harley waited in the gray, its chrome dulled by dew. He checked the strap on the bear tied to the sissy bar, the ribbon bright as a new scar. It did not need checking, but he did it anyway. Rook watched from the clubhouse door with a rag over his shoulder and a look that could have been a question or a benediction. "You taking that thing again?" he asked. Jake nodded. "The bear's got business." Rook snorted once, but his eyes softened. "Ride steady." "Brother," Jake answered by starting the engine. The hum settled in the street like a heartbeat. No one argued with. The shelter's brick had warmed overnight. Inside, the lobby smelled of lemon cleaner and new paper. Dana was at the desk, cardigan in another color but the same shape. She smiled without speaking, the kind of smile that leaves room for the day to unfold as it needs. The twins were on the floor with crayon, the bear missing from their grip. The younger one's gaze went straight to it, then to the knot at the back of Jake's bike, and only when she saw it holding did she turn back to her drawing. Sarah came from the hallway, Laura beside her, both walking with purpose built of exhaustion and resolve. The folder in Laura's hands looked like it could hold a city's worth of promises. 3 rooms, Laura said, advocate, clerk, notary. The order stands when the ink dries in the last one. Her tone was factual, not dramatic, but Jake heard something under it. A quiet satisfaction that systems, when shepherded right, can be made to work. Room 1 was the advocate's, soft chairs, water bottles sweating on the table, a box of tissues placed like punctuation at the edge, Verification first, the woman said. She had a calm that felt trained. Sarah gave her name, her daughter's names, their address. Laura guided her through the story again, not for sympathy, but for clarity. Facts live longer that way. Jake added the details that belonged to him: the broken door, the shoe print, the smell of oil and fear, the time on the hospital band. The advocate wrote with care, checking spelling, asking nothing that would make the air thinner. When they finished, she stacked the papers in a single pile and capped her pen. "That's one truth down," she said. The second room was smaller, harder. A clerk waited behind a high desk, a stamp at her elbow, and a monitor that blinked with official impatience. "Protective order," she said. Glancing at the form, she pointed to lines that waited for signatures. Her eyes moved like a scanner. Sarah signed where Laura indicated, her hand still uncertain but steady enough. The clerk took the papers, stamped them with a motion practiced into muscle, and handed them to an officer near the door. "He will carry these to the judge. Wait here." They waited. The clock's minute hand moved like an old man climbing stairs. The twins sat together, small and self-contained, the bear's absence now an accepted fact. Dana appeared with 2 cups of juice and a packet of crackers. The younger offered a sip to the empty space beside her. The bear's ghost made visible by kindness. No one laughed. When the officer returned, the stamped order in hand, his voice carried the flat music of bureaucracy done right. Signed, effective immediately. The paper bore the seal in the corner, still damp, still shining. The third room was quieter, cooler. The notary's office smelled of ink and patience. A woman with gray hair and a purple pen looked up from her desk. "Statement for notarization," she said, and opened the folder. Jake's handwriting filled the top page, even and deliberate. She read it without comment, eyes taking in each line. Then she turned it toward him and tapped the space at the bottom. "Sign here." He did. The letters went down slow, weight behind every stroke. She pressed the metal seal into the margin, and the paper yielded with a dry click. "There," she said. "Now the world believes you." She filed the copy, handed him the original, and smiled in the small way that suggests both trust and respect. She took the photographs next, one by one, and matched them to the chain form. Broken door, shattered frame, the time-stamped image of Sarah's wristband. Each received a number, a plus, a label. She copied them to a drive, slid it into a sleeve, sealed the edge, and signed across it. "Redundancy is safety," she said. "Keep your copies." Jake nodded. Laura did too. The sound of the label pressing down was a kind of closure, quiet and absolute. When they left, the sun was higher, the light sharp enough to make the shelter's windows throw small squares onto the floor. Dana waited by the exit with a brown paper bag. "Clean shirts for the girls," she said. "Granola bars. A list of doors that stay open." Sarah took it, nodded thanks, and looked once more at Jake. The strain around her mouth had softened into something like peace. "Thank you," she said, the word whole this time. He gave the answer that fit the moment. "You're held. That's the job now." She nodded, and that nod became the signal for the girls to move. They followed her into the line of light that drew a clean path to the street. Outside, Laura touched Jake's sleeve, not to stop him, but to make sure the next step reached him fully. "Tomorrow," she said. "Arraignment. You don't have to be there, but your presence changes the temperature in that room." He understood. Some fires need to burn cool. "I'll be there," he said. "Good," she replied. "The judge will notice." The ride back to the clubhouse was long enough for reflection and short enough to stay sharp. The wind smelled of asphalt and distant rain. The bear's ribbon fluttered like punctuation at the end of a sentence. The day had written well. He thought about rooms, how each one held a different kind of truth, one for telling, one for law, one for belief. Together they made something like justice, imperfect and alive. He had learned that speed was not the same as progress, that quiet was sometimes the loudest proof. Evening brought him home to the soft hum of the building, the light above the door still flickering like it could not decide whether to hold or give. Rook leaned against the wall with a look that wanted an update but respected silence. Jake parked, killed the engine, and said the only words that mattered. "It holds." Rook nodded and disappeared inside. He stayed out with a cooling cup of coffee and watched the sky change color. The street muttered to itself in low tones. Somewhere, a door closed gently. The bear caught the last gold of the day, its ribbon a small strip of faith against chrome. His phone buzzed once. Laura again. Order served. Patrol confirmed compliance. Next appointment at 8. He typed one word back. Here. The night pressed close but not heavy. He let it. In the morning he would go to the courthouse, sit where he needed to, bring the same calm he had carried through the last 7 rooms. Not penance, not pride, just the act of showing up when the world needs a witness. He looked at the bear and smiled, a line of quiet humor at the corner of his mouth. Tomorrow would have its noise. Tonight belonged to silence that had finally learned to stay. He reached the courthouse before the doors found their daytime voice. Before the corridors remembered how to carry footsteps, the building held itself like a stern book. Stone covers closed, spine unbent by weather. He left the Harley a block off beneath a tree that made its own square of shade and checked the small knot at the back rail where the bear rode. The paper ribbon was snug, the letters dried dark. He pressed a thumb to the leather tie, the way a man touches a talisman without needing to name it, then walked. The steps were honest. Brass rails kept their morning chill. Inside, the air stacked itself in familiar layers of wax and paper, coffee and dust, the quiet scent of decisions that do not go away just because the room empties. Security worked without theater. A low hum, a bin for keys and coins, a polite request to place the pocket knife that opened boxes and apples, but never trouble. Boots stayed on. Belt stayed on. He passed through and let the machine accept him like a stamp accepts ink. A clerk in a navy sweater pointed him down the right hall with 2 fingers, a gesture learned from long days and 1,000 repeats. "Arraignments," she said, and the word carried him more efficiently than any map. The corridor kept its sound low. Voices damped to felt. Doors wore numbers and names and did not need to be admired. He saw Laura first, not because she made noise, but because presence can be louder than volume. She lifted a palm in greeting, a small, steady flag that said, "You are in the right place." "You are early," she said, which in her language meant good. Quick as possible when rooms behave. He sat beside her and let silence be their third chair. The clock on the wall moved its hands with the indifference that makes systems reliable. Lawyers drifted in with file folders and hair still damp from showers. A bailiff leaned on a door jamb, with a posture shaped by years of being the first and last line. The public does not notice until it does. Jake kept his eyes on the door to the courtroom, not on faces, not on whispers. He had a job. Witness is a job. When their case was called, they entered a room built for function, disguised as ceremony. Benches murmured. The seal above the bench stared in a way that had outlived arguments. The judge took the high seat without preface, a body in black that absorbed attention and reflected only order. The clerk read the docket with a voice trained to make ink move. "Defendant présent," the clerk said, and a side door opened. He came in under escort. Cuffs, saying what words would try later. Sleep had not been kind to him. The jaw trembled. The eyes hunted for something to fight that was not allowed inside these walls. He looked for a face to grab with a stare. He did not find it. Jake kept his gaze on the bench, where authority sat, and on Laura, where guidance lived. "Counsel," the judge said. The public defender rose with a folder that had not yet grown heavy from facts. The prosecutor stood with a folder that already had. The judge's cadence was the sound of a level finding true name, charge, conditions sought. The pen in the clerk's hand made a rail out of words. The prosecutor kept it clean. "Photographs," she said. "Time, stumpet. Chain recorded. Hospital band number verified against chart. Protective order signed yesterday and served last night." She asked for distance, measured in feet, and absence measured in silence. She did not heat the air. She aligned it. Laura passed her a sheet with a gesture that meant, "Now." The prosecutor checked, nodded, continued. "2 prior complaints on file," she said. "No prosecutions, but logged." The narrative did not need fever. It needed weight. The defender attempted the old turn, the story that wraps harm in misunderstanding. Tempers, stress, pressure at work. He lifted a word like reconcile, and the judge let it fall where it belonged, on the floor between pretense and policy. The defendant tried to speak, mouth loading, with a sentence aimed like a thrown thing. The bailiff did his job with breath and body alone, a presence that made a wall without laying a hand. "Sir," the judge said, "address the court only through counsel." A page turned, paper moved. The room attended. In the small gravity of that act lay the memory of every boundary the law had made and would make again. Conditions. The judge said, "No contact, direct or indirect. No approach within the distance named in the order. Surrender any firearms and any permits. Appear at the next date. Failure to appear will bring a warrant to your door." The words went down like stakes set into good earth. Jake felt his breath lengthen. He was not happy. Happiness has edges too round for a room like this. He felt the satisfaction of torque meeting spec, of a joint seating in clean thread, of a mechanism doing what it was designed to do, because hands had respected its tolerances. Beside him, Laura exhaled once and marked a time in the calendar that lived partly on paper and partly behind her eyes. "Anything further?" the judge asked, a ritual phrase that in truth checks the map for missing roads. The prosecutor shook her head a fraction. The work would now belong to officers and patrol logs, and a watch kept day by day. The defender made a small motion that meant argument will look for another venue. The judge lifted the gavel, a tool of wood whose head had been polished by decades of decisions, and set it down once. The sound was not theatrical. It did not ring with drama. It ticked, firm and finite, the sound a seal makes when it closes and air stops. It said the paper is now heavier than your insistence. In the quiet after, even the venting learned to soften. The defendant's shoulders sagged into the small weight of chain. He was led out the way he had come. The hallway beyond took back what belonged to it. "All rise," the clerk said, and the judge left without requiring anyone's feelings to change shape on the way. The room returned to human scale. Whispers, leather soles, a cough held in the throat too long, pens given back their purpose. Laura looked at Jake, not for congratulations, but for confirmation. "It holds," she said. He nodded. It was the rope they had learned to throw across the dark. They stepped into the corridor that turns citizens back into people. At a counter, a clerk with quick hands stamped copies and slid them into clear sleeves with the speed of habit. Names checked against names, dates checked against dates. A little war against error fought with ink and attention. Laura took a sleeve, checked it again, handed one to Jake. "For her," she said. proof on paper for when voice is tired. He tucked it inside his jacket where documents stay flat and sweat cannot bother them. The same pocket where spare bolts and stray mercy used to live. Need anything else? He asked, knowing the answer but wanting the moment to say it. Be available, she said. Do not chase. If the order is crossed, a call will come. If the order is honored, you will never know you helped it whole. He saw the shape of vocation in that sentence and gave back the only answer it asked for. I can do that. Good, she said. Then go breathe air that does not taste like envelopes. Headed. The steps poured him into a brightness that did not glare. Chrome on the Harley offered a small square of sun. A light wind tugged once at the bear's ribbon, and then minded itself. He sat the saddle and did not start the engine yet. He let the room fade out of his chest, the way heat ticks down in a machine, when you give it a minute to be kind to itself. The doors opened and closed, giving the city back its citizens, and taking in their troubles in measured mouthfuls. Down the block, he saw Dana moving quick with a folder under her arm. A blue cardigan traded for another blue. She lifted a hand, and he lifted 2 fingers in reply. The grammar of a new alliance that did not need words. A delivery van coughed and settled at a hydrant. A pigeon stamped twice and forgave the world another hour. He unzipped his jacket enough to sink the sleeve of proofs deeper, then zipped to the notch that lets a chest breathe without advertising itself. He checked the knot on the sissy bar again because anchors deserve attention even when they do not demand it. The bear looked down the road like a stitched sentinel, paper sash worn without irony or apology. He let himself think just long enough to make a ledger line. The first night's flicker that had looked like hesitation and behaved like a summons. The door frame splinters he had photographed from the angle that lets shadow testify. The hospital band number read into multiple rooms and printed until it learned its own permanence. The dry press of a seal, the stamp whose sound you feel in your hand bones after the echo leaves, his name on a line, block letters. A tool at last instead of a habit. Behind him, the courthouse exhaled and inhaled. Another tide. Ahead, the old road threw out its ordinary miles and did not pretend to wisdom. He turned the key. The engine woke in a bass note that asked no one's permission and still managed to be respectful. He rolled to the corner, yielded to a crosswalk where a child hopped a chalk square, then took the turn that did not mean away so much as forward. He did not look for the man who had been led out. He had no business there. His eyes kept the duties they had accepted. The light, the pedestrian, the bus whose only politics were arrival and departure. He watched a crossing guard lift a palm like a tiny gavel, a local authority exercised with grace. He watched the bear's ribbon nod once in the headlamp's wash, and then lie still. At the first red light he set both boots and loosened his hands on the grips. A man in a flour-dusted apron looked at the bear, looked at Jake, and offered the small city smile that says, I see your story, and will not make you say it out loud. Jake tipped a chin in reply and let the other man keep walking. Green came. He moved. The courthouse fell behind without needing dismissal. He took the avenue that leans toward the river where water repeats what is true without tiring of it. The engine found its steady hymn. The morning patched itself back into plain cloth. He did not rehearse speeches. He kept inventory. Order signed. Conditions clear. Copies delivered. Calls possibly coming, and, if the world behaved for once, blessedly not. He breathed and let breath deliver weight to the places built to carry it. A wind shift nosed at the ribbon and then left it alone. The knot held, the letters stayed dark. He rode past a wall painted by children, houses with doors drawn firm but not mean, doors that open for the right hands. He set that picture beside the single knock of the gavel in the room he had just left. and let them agree with each other. He was not running. He was not arriving. He was conveying, the way the river conveys, the way a hand carries a paper to another hand and knows the motion is the message. The bear's head nodded once more, as if to say, "We saw it, we were there. We will remember for the people who cannot carry it every day." A block later, the breeze folded back into stillness, and the world made one last small sound of approval. Somewhere behind him, ink dried and kept speaking. Somewhere ahead, a modest door would open when the right knock came. He carried those facts between the hum under him and the calm in his hands, and let the long road do what it does when asked with respect. Morning did not sharpen or sing. It settled like clean linen on a bed that had been made with care. The city breathed in its ordinary register, steady and unhurried, and Jake matched it. He checked the leather tie at the back rail where the bear rode, the paper ribbons snug against stitched fur. The letters dried into a quiet oath. His thumb pressed the knot once, a small ritual of attention, and then he rolled toward the shelter because the day had asked him to be near and plain. Inside the lobby, the scent of lemon and paper felt like a promise kept. Dana waved from the desk. Cardigan, a new blue, posture the same dependable slope. The twins came down the hall with a purposeful hush. Visitor tags pinned square, crayons still on their fingers like tiny badges of work. The older carried a thin folder with careful hand. The younger touched empty air at her side, the place where the bear usually sat, and then glanced to the door, found it tied where it should be, and let her shoulders drop. Sarah followed with the measured grace of a person rebuilding from the inside out. Color had crept back into her face by honest degrees. Laura stepped from the side office with a clipboard and a packet, the corners aligned, the rhythm of the day already written under her breath. Shelter appointment across town, advocate review, brief stop at the precinct desk for certified copies, then back to the room with the nightlight that did not flicker, and the door that locked with the sound of a finished sentence. They moved as one line through sunlight, the van taking the small bodies and the woman who mattered most, the motorcycle taking the job of shadow, the clipboard riding beside the hum of the engine like a metronome. The precinct desk was a square of procedure inside a larger square of routine. A sergeant with a practical face slid a clear sleeve across the counter and tapped the seal. "Certified," he said. Voice even. Sarah signed. The pen clicked. Paper learned a second home. "Redundancy is a kindness," Laura said, and the sergeant gave a half grin that meant the lesson had been learned long ago. They were almost done when the day changed its tone by half a degree. Laura's phone buzzed. She read, tipped the screen a fraction so Jake could see the message without letting the room borrow it, then set her jaw in that way. That meant the next minutes would be handled, not dramatized. Shelter detail logged a masked call, she said softly. A voice used her name and tried a sentence shaped like a test. "He thinks words can lean over fences." Laura slid the phone away, eyes already on the doorway. "We walk," she said. "We do not adjust our stride. I will talk while we move." On the sidewalk, the usual noise kept its posture. Abu Sayed. A bicycle made a small complaint at a curb. A radio threw half a chorus at Brick and gave up. Laura spoke the numbers that turn air into record. Order served. Call received. Possible violation. Request patrol a shelter perimida. Cámaras active. She did not raise her voice. She let the words enter the line of the day and stay there. Dana buckled the twins into the van with movements that made safety look like muscle memory. Sarah slid into the seat, palm resting on the envelope in her pocket as if it were a warm stone. The door closed on the most important cargo in the city. The van pulled into its lane, blinked when it needed to, did not hurry, did not swerve. Jake's engine woke low and loyal. He fell in behind them like a second sentence, supporting the first. 2 blocks from the shelter, a car drifted out from a side street and pretended not to be doing what it was doing. The driver wore tension like a jacket, one size too small. The dent on the rear panel looked old and unlearned. The car settled a half-length back and a lane over, then slid closer, the way mistakes do when they think no one is watching. Jake did not look at the man. He watched space, angles, windows, all the places where bad decisions leave fingerprints. A patrol cruiser appeared at the far end, did not flash, did not honk, simply folded itself into a parallel street and matched the pace like a quiet fact. Laura eased ahead and moved past the shelter entrance like someone admiring brick. The cruiser turned in with gravity and parked where posture turns into policy. The van signaled, entered the loop, and paused at the door. The other car tried to follow and met a palm, a badge, and a face that had trained itself to be patient. Authorized vehicles only. The officer said through the open window, neutral and clear, "Please continue past." The driver smiled in that small, ugly way. Men smile when they are hoping charm is a legal instrument. He lifted his hand in a parody of apology and then, because overreach is a habit, let a sentence slip that did not belong to daylight. "Tell her I am just saying hello." The lapel camera stared on, a black bead with perfect memory. Laura stepped to the officer's flank and presented the thin power of a certified copy. "No contact," she said, "direct or indirect." The driver built another protest in his mouth, then noticed the second patrol car in the mirror and let his courage drain into noise. Tires talked. The camera kept its eye. An officer keyed a note on a tablet. Plate recorded. Presence documented. Indirect contact attempt logged. Dana had the door open and the twins were already moving. Feet quick, faces forward, as if the building itself had taught them its doorways. Sarah followed. The desk clerk pressed the lock with a practiced thumb, and the entrance made the sound it makes when a sentence ends. Laura and Jake stood outside the glass and did nothing loudly. That kind of quiet is work. The cruisers idled 1 minute more, long enough to set a narrative, then peeled away with nods that meant our circle is larger than this curb. Inside, the lobby let go of its held breath. Dana signed the van back in. Sarah smoothed the edge of her sleeve, as if she were ironing out the day. Laura slid into the side office and printed a note that would not forget. Indirect contact at entrance. Patrol present. Cámaras active. Plate and time. She stapled the page to a copy of the order and fed one set to the prosecutor's slot, one to Sarah's binder. The stapler made its small bite. The chain held. Before noon, the phone at the desk cut a square into the air. Patrol had eyes on the same car 2 blocks east, rolling too slow where the curb did not want company. The watch commander requested a second unit and a supervisor. Laura's head tilted, a small calibration that meant she would now be 5 minutes ahead of whatever came. "We will be present," she said. "We will not chase." Dana shepherded the twins and Sarah into a deeper room with a couch and picture books, a room where safety has a roof of its own. The door closed soft. Jake and Laura went back to the sidewalk and let the block see exactly what it needed to see. Pedestrians changed their pace without admitting it. The car rolled past, windows down when they should have been up, a mouth practicing sentences. It did not say because uniforms set a boundary. The supervisor arrived in a white shirt that looked like a clean decision. He gave the situation its correct name. "Active protective order," he said. "Your presence meets the standard for indirect contact and intimidation." He did not ask for cooperation. He placed facts on the ground. The driver tried the last poor trick that men try. He stepped out and leaned half a pace into space that did not belong to him. Overreach looks new to the person doing it and old to everyone else. The officers took him with a choreography designed to spare everyone drama. Hands where they must be, wrists found, weight cancelled. The cuffs made their small, honest sound, the same sound metal makes when it stops pretending it is not metal. The supervisor read the words that draw the line: violation of a protective order, disorderly conduct. The camera watched, neutral and exact. The block exhaled. A delivery dolly rolled again. A woman with a terrier finished her loop with shoulders a little lower. Laura read the time aloud for the record and for the lenses. She spoke the plate and the distance from the door. The supervisor nodded without looking up. Paperwork already breathing, he said, which in another voice might have been a joke. And here was respect. Transport arrived. The car with the cage took the day to the correct room. Inside, the shelter opened the inner door so the twins could measure the shape of the world after it behaves. Sarah sat taller by a fraction. She let a small smile live and then end before it weakened. Laura gave her the new incident note and an officer's card. The sound of the stapler was small and right. Dusk found Jake and Laura at the courthouse door again for the fast hearing that follows a loud mistake. The judge on duty carried the patience of a person trained to hold a room steady. The prosecutor described what the camera had already captured with better balance than any mouth. The defender tried corners and found none. Release rescinded. Remand set. A date named for deeper reckoning. The gavel gave its dry tick, a sound that says air now holds more weight than your insistence. Evening pressed lavender along the river. Laura closed her folder with the quiet satisfaction of a mechanic who knows the wheel will not wobble by morning. He fell into his own noise. She said, "The system did its job." Jake nodded once, a motion that filed truth in the cabinet where it belongs. They rode past water that has never been bored by its work. The motorcycle hummed in a key the night approved. The ribbon on the bear lifted once and settled, letters dark and calm. At the shelter, the night guard lifted a hand through glass. Inside, the drawing had been taped higher on the wall, where new arrivals would see it without looking for it. The door in the drawing was thick and square and ready. Jake stood with his palm on the tank and let the heat move into his hand. He watched the building keep its promise and felt that clean procedural satisfaction that had carried him through rooms with seals and stamps. He did not need to be seen. He had learned the quiet usefulness of standing outside and letting the block know that someone steady was looking both ways. His phone buzzed once. Laura's message was brief and complete. Violation filed. Copies tomorrow. Sleep. He answered with the same small word he always used when presence was the point. He swung into the saddle and let the headlamp find the easy line. The city gave him space. The road accepted the weight. He rode through a night tuned to the middle register, where good work rests. Somewhere behind him, a door closed, with the honest sound that metal makes when the day is done. Somewhere ahead, a lock clicked for a family that had earned a quiet stretch of dark. The bear nodded once in the headlamp's wash, as if to say the memory is stored, the proof is carried, the chain holds when hands use it right. He rolled on, not faster than breath, and not slower than thought, and let the hum of the old machine escort the facts into tomorrow. Morning arrived with the calm of a room already put back in order. It did not knock or insist. It eased across the city and slipped under doors with the courtesy of someone who knows where everything belongs. Jake woke before the light fully declared itself and sat on the edge of the bed. listening to the quiet facts of the day. The jacket hung on the chair, shoulders squared by habit. On the table lay the clear sleeve Laura had handed him the night before, a fresh copy, clipped to the earlier copy, the edges lined as if they had agreed to stand together. He set his palm on the plastic and felt the faint cool of it, the way a mechanic rests a hand on a hood to confirm heat, not to change it. The world still held. Coffee steamed the way good work breathes. He let it cool until it tasted like honesty. The phone buzzed once, the length of a neat sentence. Shelter placement extended. Case worker assigned. Next hearing planted on the calendar. No contact overnight. He answered with the single word that means I am here and will remain here without fanfare. Then he took the stairs into a morning that had already decided to behave. The Harley waited in the shade with the patience of an old partner. He checked the leather tie on the back rail and the ribbon around the bear's belly. The letters had dried into certainty. The edge of the paper had grown a little soft, where turning proof into presence. He tightened the knot, the way you tighten a phrase so wind cannot pull it apart. Then he rolled toward the shelter. Not fast, not slow, the exact pace of a man escorting quiet. Inside, lemon and paper and a whisper of soap. Dana looked up from the log with the same measured kindness that keeps doors useful. Her cardigan had traded one calm color for another. She stamped a line on the page and lifted her eyes. The twins were at a corner table with picture books, feet hooked on chair rungs. The focused silence of children who finally believe that quiet belongs to them too. The older gave the door a quick inventory glance and returned to the page. The younger tapped 2 fingers against her hip where the bear sometimes rode, then found the knot with her eyes through the glass and let her face ease by a small degree that mattered. Sarah stepped from the hallway with the posture of someone rebuilding from the inside. A thin bandage crossed one cheek, like a pale chalk line. Her sleeves were pushed to her elbows. Practical. Ready. Clean. Laura followed with a folder whose corners had been squared by years and a stack of forms that did not pretend to be anything but tasks. "We have a move," she said, voice low and steady. "A longer room in a Keter wing. A meeting with the caseworker after lunch. A call with the school liaison tomorrow to place the girls' insurance paperwork. Walking itself through the right door." She touched each line on the schedule with a fingertip, as if pinning cloth to a pattern. Sarah nodded once at each point, not as permission asked, but as agreement given. They made a small parade down the bright hall. Dana carried a set of sheets in plastic. Laura carried the folder. Sarah kept a hand on the envelope in her pocket. Jake picked up the bag with yesterday's groceries and the little box of bandage strips. The room they entered smelled of paint and pine and a floor mopped last night. 2 beds, a small table, a cork board with push pins that still had their heads, a window that moved up when asked and did not complain about it, a nightlight tucked near the baseboard, steady as a small lighthouse. Dana made a square of the sheets, corners crisp, comfort without a lecture. The twins chose a bed by consulting each other first, and the furniture second. They climbed up like sailors who trust a deck. The older placed a drawing at the head and smoothed it twice with a precise palm. House, door, bear. The younger crouched to watch the nightlight, breathe its mild glow, and seemed to accept that it would do its job without arguing. Laura dealt the next steps, like cards from a well-kept deck. Caseworker after lunch. A thrift card for clothes that feel like choices and not leftovers. A medical follow-up set at a time chosen by the person who will sit in the chair. A counselor who will meet on their terms and not the other way round. Her tone made the list sound like a map and not a burden. She slid a smaller stack of cards to Sarah. Shelter desk. Caseworker. after hours, number that answers, her own number again. Keep these where your hand finds them without looking, she said. Sarah tucked them into the binder and slid the binder into the drawer, as if filing a weather report for a season she could now recognize. They ate a plain lunch that tasted like relief pretending to be ordinary. Crackers, sliced fruit, milk that refused to curdle under doubt. The twins invented a code of glances and half words, and let it serve. The drawing watched from the board. The door in the drawing held its line. The caseworker arrived in the early afternoon and introduced herself with a handshake and a pace that respected breath. She listened more than she wrote. When she did write, she used nouns and times, not opinions. She explained how rent help works in this corner of the city, how records travel when people crawl rather than fall. How a system learns children's names when you remind it twice, and then once more, with a copy of the copy. She said her name was April, and somehow it sounded like permission for the year to tilt toward better weather. Mid-afternoon, Laura stepped into the hall to take a call and returned with one clean line of satisfaction allowed to live on her face before she folded it away. Indictment filed. Hearing date set. Discovery to be exchanged next week as promised. No change to contact privileges, because there will not be any. She met Sarah's eyes and did not look away. The world is doing its job today, she said. Tomorrow we keep it at it. Sarah nodded and let her shoulders rest a fraction lower. By late light, the room had gathered the first signs of belonging. A thrift bag brought 2 soft sweaters and a pair of sneakers with soles that flexed. The girls tried them on and examined each other's steps like inspectors. Dana pinned a list of weekend events under the drawing. Library Story Hour, a free clinic for simple needs, a small neighborhood fair where paint becomes tigers and butterflies in a mirror, where the price at the door is patience and a smile. Rook called with an update that pretended not to care and failed. The neon is fixed, he said. Sign will hold steady. Ride by if you feel like seeing light behave. Jake said he would, and Rook let the call end there, not because he lacked words, but because he preferred to spend them when the world insists. Evening drew itself along the window and did not demand comment. Laura and Dana did what competent people do when the day has been useful. They handed the night to the night. April promised to return with a calendar and a school folder. The desk clerk took the seat behind the glass. The quiet that follows good handoff is not absence. It is trust wearing work boots. Jake walked with Laura to the curb where air cools the temper of hours. Anything left that wants muscle or a ride? He asked. She shook her head. It is paperwork and patience now, she said. He smiled at the fairness of that sentence. Heroics were over, and he felt no ache at the thought. He had not been built for spotlights. He had been built for torque and timing and signatures that hold. He swung a leg over the Harley and sat without starting it. The ribbon across the bear's belly lay quiet, letters dark, edges softened by use. He retied the knot, a breath tighter, and trimmed nothing. Wear is a kind of proof. You do not keep things new. You keep them true. Laura tapped the pocket where his copies lived. Keep them on you a few days, she said. Sometimes certainty buys peace. He nodded. She checked her watch and smiled like a person pleased with a machine that meets spec. I will check at first light. You will hear if routine needs weight. You will not hear if routine holds. He lifted 2 fingers, the salute they had taught each other without saying so. He rode to the clubhouse because tools should see a day end. The neon sign held steady. A promise in glass. Inside, a short story about a stubborn bolt ended with a laugh shaped like relief. He nodded at the right moments and did not provide conclusions. He poured coffee. He did not require. and stepped back to the threshold where a man can see both inside and out, and choose neither as a permanent address. Dusk bruised into violet and did not complain. A bus sighed and left. Two kids worked at the art of stopping without a foot on the ground. A dog negotiated with a leash and won a small concession. The street kept its small bargains and held them. The phone buzzed once. April again. Concise and kind. School assessment set for Monday morning. Supplies arranged. Counseling scheduled at a time the mother chose. Thank you for being visible without being loud. He sent the smallest reply and let gratitude live in the quiet around the letters. Night settled with agreement rather than command. He passed the shelter once more because routine deserves witnesses. Through the glass, the night guard read a page and turned it. In a second-floor window, a square of warm light paused and then dimmed. The drawing on the board would be a shadow now, but the pin would hold its corner true. He parked a block away and let the engine cool until the metal ticked itself level. He set a hand on the tank and felt the warmth travel into his palm and then outward, shared with air already cooler by a degree that counts. He thought of the first flicker on the first night, the small stutter that had felt like a question and turned out to be an invitation. He thought of stamps and seals and the tidy sounds they make when paper becomes proof. He thought of a cheap strip of white tied around old cloth, promoted by use into a sash with duty. He started the bike and took the long way home, not for distance, but as a courtesy to the road that had carried its portion of the work. At the last light he set both boots and breathed once for what had been, and once for what would come. No itch to outrun anything. The signal changed. He rolled forward into a night tuned to mercy, both given and received. The engine settled into the only prayer he knows how to say without words. He did not narrate a story about becoming. He let the facts ride as passengers who do not need to be entertained. Orders filed, copies carried, doors that lock, names that answer, a drawing pinned above a bed, a nightlight that does not flicker, a phone that buzzes only when it should. At the turn to his street, he looked once more at the ribbon and the knot, and the narrow line where ink had dried on paper and kept speaking. He smiled because he trusted that tomorrow would be ordinary and therefore beautiful. He let the headlamp cut a simple path and followed it. The chain held, the road stayed honest. In the end, this story reminds us that justice isn't always loud. It's often patient, procedural, and built on quiet courage. It shows how healing begins not with grand gestures, but with small, steady acts. A signature on a page, a light that stays on through the night, a person who simply shows up and refuses to look away. True strength, as we grow older, often looks like restraint, the choice to do what's right without the need to be seen doing it. And sometimes, the most powerful rebellion against cruelty or indifference is the calm insistence that facts, empathy, and truth still matter. For those who have lived through betrayal, prejudice, or silence, this story is a gentle reminder. You are not defined by what broke you, but by what you quietly rebuilt. True gold fears no fire. As the saying goes, what endures has already been tested. Standing up for fairness doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it means documenting, protecting, or simply staying kind in a world that forgets how. If this story spoke to you, if it made you think about your own strength or someone you know who found theirs, share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your reflections, your stories of endurance and grace. Don't forget to like this video if it moved you, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Another true-to-life journey through struggle, courage, and quiet redemption. Until then, may your nights be peaceful, your mornings purposeful, and may you always find light steady enough to trust, even after the darkest hour.